Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Finding Your Way on Main Street, a guide to developing and implementing a successful wayfinding program. My name is Savannah Blance Maria. I am the programs coordinator at Connecticut Main Street Center. In a moment, I will introduce today's speakers, but first, just a few words. Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. We all know a great downtown when we're in it. It's a feeling and energy that we can sense, see, and experience, but it can be hard to articulate what exactly makes a main street great. So we've broken it down into 6 qualities to make it easier to grasp. There is always dedicated Main Street management. The Main Street is connected by multiple modes of transportation for people to access. It's welcoming, friendly, and inclusive. Sustainable practices are in place that bring life and vibrancy for today and for the future. Small businesses are supported and encouraged, as well as residential and commercial development. And there is a unique sense of place. It is our mission to assess, educate, and convene around these topics, central to advancing communities across Connecticut to establish and maintain vibrant main streets. We are grateful to our sponsors and funding partners that make this work possible. Connecticut Main Street Center's founding sponsors are Eversource and the State of Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. Additional funding comes from Webster Bank, Travelers, and Liberty Bank. With that, I am very excited to introduce our speakers from Merge Design, John Bosio, Project Manager, and Glenn Swantak, Design Principal. I will hand it over to you now, John.
Thank you. Can see our screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining Glenn and I today. Again, I'm John Bosio with Merge. We're going to give you just a real brief introduction to us and then get right into establishing how you go about to establish a wayfinding program. Just real quick on Merge, we are an environmental graphic design firm, and we focus on community wayfinding along with parks and trails, transit, and campuses. We've worked on community wayfinding projects throughout the country. We've done large downtowns like San Diego and Phoenix and Tampa, and we've done small communities like Fredericksburg, Texas. So hopefully, as you go through this process, we can bring a lot of lessons learned as we get through some of these examples. I think you can often think about wayfinding as a core element of your tourism toolbox. There's lots of other things that go into attracting visitors and creating that experience in a downtown, and wayfinding is a piece of that toolbox. And it really helps that visitor experience. And what you're trying to do is increase, in some cases, overnight stays, but you really want people to stay longer and come back to your place by promoting the different assets and attractions that you may have. There's a real economic return on investment with community wayfinding, and through the projects that we've worked on, we've done different surveys and revisits to those projects to see where those increases have happened. When you look at sort of that repeat visitation and really trying to promote that depth of destination, that people are not aware of the things that they can do in a downtown. And we've seen that in Asheville and in Northwest Arkansas, where visitors have stated that they would extend their trip or that the signage itself had a positive influence on their visit. I think what you mostly see is secondary destinations. They tend to see the greatest benefit, right? They're not a large arena or maybe in a large museum that has different events and advertisements that they sort of utilize to promote their facilities. Those secondary destinations, those smaller places, they're the ones that really see the benefit from a wayfinding program of building awareness of, oh, I didn't realize I was so close to that. Oh, I've heard of that. We should go visit it. So one of the things you may start to think about, well, how can I get started in creating a community wayfinding program? So these are just some of the first steps that you may take. One is to organize a steering committee. Usually that's anywhere from 5 to 8 representatives, and that definitely obviously should be somebody from the city, but maybe a major destination, maybe somebody from the parks, and create this group that will guide the process. You definitely need a project director, and I would say a real cheerleader for the project, someone who's really going to go out and promote the benefits of why the town is doing this type of program. Their role is really going to be to manage meetings, manage public input or engagement, and then work through the sort of protocol and approval processes as well. Then you want to start to think about the types of projects that you may start to consider. So groups come to us all the time. In some cases, they're not sure what they want to do. They may want to do everything, and that gets a little bit, sort of a grander scope. Or you could say, I want to do something very specific. I just want to solve our parking issue, or we just need gateways. So because the number of elements that you decide to plan and implement, that obviously has a effect on not only the design and planning process, but then also your implementation. So is it and you can think of it as sort of big picture in gateways, vehicular signs, parking, get out of your car, your pedestrian, kiosk, trails. There's lots of sort of details, and we'll show you examples of that, but you really want to get control of what that scope of work may be. Create a list of stakeholders. So who will be part of this process? You have the steering committee, you have the destinations that you're going to direct to, you have interested parties, so they might not be directing to that destination, but there are groups that can provide good input as to what visitors are looking for. And then you want to have a stakeholder kickoff meeting and start to discuss some of these opportunities. And then you can start to establish funding sources. So there's not just one single source for wayfinding. It often comes from multiple sources, and projects are often phased over time. So some places, lots of times places that maybe have just gone through a branding exercise, they're really high on getting gateways and identification out there. And other downtowns, they really want to focus on parking. So you can start to look at it that way. There's different sources for that. Here's just a list of funding sources that we've seen wayfinding programs utilize over time. Most recently, ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, that has funded a lot of wayfinding programs, both the design and planning and the implementation. That's sort of running its course towards the end of this year. But we've had federal land access program, tourism fund, scenic byways. Scenic byway is a great one where if you have a scenic byway running through your town and you're interested in doing kiosks, you can do things as simple as talk about, interpretive panel on your kiosk and go for funding to build the entire kiosk, which can also act as a wayfinding tool. So there's lots of different ways to do it depending on the size of the town and what the access to different funding sources may be. How much does it cost? This is a question we get all the time. So there's really two costs associated, let's say 3 costs associated with a wayfinding program. There's the design team and planning effort. That's what Glenn and I do. We should be real clear, we don't build signs, right? We're not trying to do this with more signs. We're trying to actually do it with the least amount of signs. But we go through a wayfinding process as the design firm. Sometimes that involves engineers, whether that's structural or civil, especially when you're getting into maybe state right-of-ways. And then sometimes on larger projects, there's a public engagement aspect of this as well. And then there's the implementation, the fabrication and installation of the program. And here you see, we're just giving you some general ranges based on the size of a place. But again, it goes back to establishing what that scope of work is that you want to do. So when you start to think about gateway elements, they can be, there's a range of gateway costs. It can be $50,000, $100,000 for something that has fountains and fireworks, or it could be a $5,000 simple post and panel sign. But these are good ranges to look at or to consider when you're doing a regional wayfinding program. We work in all ranges, from very small parking only projects. We're doing one here in Westchester, to regional programs like we're doing in the Cajun Bayou, where it's a 100-mile long corridor. So it just really depends on the quantity of signs and the extent of the scope of work. You also want to consider the long-term maintenance of the system. So we'll give a number out as we go through this, but there is definitely sort of an annual cost to maintaining the system. So whether that's, a sign gets hit by a car, or a destination moves or changes its name, those kind of things have to be worked into it. As part of our process, we also can turn over a maintenance guide that outlines what the process is for replacing a sign or updating a sign. And then you also have your own internal staff project manager. That's certainly a cost that should be considered as you think about implementing a program. I think often people think that Glenn and I come into town, we run around and we put up signs everywhere. That's not what we do. Signs are a big part of it, and that's what you're going to see today. But when we think about a wayfinding program, we think about it holistically from the moment someone decides to visit a town and they go on a website. What kind of information are they getting? We're not redesigning websites, but we are making suggestions of, oh, maybe you should have your parking map up front. Or are there other sort of elements of the website that we can push wayfinding information closer to the front? How are people utilizing their phone to find their way, right? Is there a digital strategy that you can consider within this, whether that is something with your phone, a mobile app, or a digital kiosk or iBeacons? We've done, digital strategies to say, here's a layer of information that you may consider as part of this. And then the environment, and how does that play a role in your ability to find your way? So these aren't things that we can generally change, but we understand that it has that effect on someone's behavior when they're looking to go from point A to point B. So whether that's a landmark that is, some towns have a very strong landmark that give people orientation. Other towns have streets that are numbered that give you an understanding that I'm at 3rd and I'm going to 12th, and okay, I'm going the right direction. I know how far I have to go. Those all affect how we plan the system. And then there's support information, visitor guides, maps, brochures. What we want to do is get all these things to talk to each other. So whether that's terminology or just from a graphic design language, it should all feel like it's coming from one voice. And then you can think about the signage, and always think about that as you're going through developing your scope of big picture in, right? So there's gateway elements that welcome you to the town. Is there a wow gateway versus just a simple boundary marker? Vehicular signs that get you to the destinations and get you to parking. You get out of your car, you become a pedestrian. Is there a kiosk that gives you a map, and what kind of information is on that map? Is there a QR code that you can scan to get a list of businesses? And then interpretive signs. How do you tell the story of your particular place that can, reflect the character and culture of it? You certainly can start to go into bicycle signs and park signage and trail signage. All of that, you're just getting deeper and deeper into the different wayfinding elements that may be in your community. Glenn, do you want to do the photos?
Yeah, sure. So just starting to show some examples of what John was just talking about. So, having that arrival gateway element that is, here it's welcoming you to the downtown and also promoting shopping, dining, arts. It can also be a more of a traditional look. We try and design things so they feel of their place. So in Frederick, Maryland, it has more of a historic look. You get out of the park in Mansfield, Connecticut. This is a rendering we did in downtown stores. This is a gateway, right? You get out of your car, you're in a parking garage. This is an opportunity for you to welcome somebody and make them feel welcome when they come in. Then from a vehicular standpoint, we have various different sizes. We do follow the MUTCD, Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, when we're doing these signs. So this is a 6-inch high copy for Brandywine Valley in Pennsylvania. So it can be a highly decorative element on the top. Or it can be a lower speed sign, single post that fits the character of a downtown. So this is in Frederick, Maryland, where it's very historic Civil War era, buildings and more historic. So we want it to feel like it's of its scale. We don't want to put big, huge signs in the downtown. Parking there's a spectrum of design for parking, right? So you have your standard P arcing sign that the DOT will put up. We don't like to do that, basically. We try to do more an enhanced version that is in the design style of the community, or even like what we did in Savannah, where it's a more custom look, where that parking P and all of the icons have a Savannah flair to them, and a style to them, using their brand colors. So you do identify a parking lot. You want to direct to the lot, you want to identify the lot, and you want to inform people who they're parking there for. So, town hall lot, municipal court, and saying that it's public parking, is really important. A lot of people, it can be confusing sometimes, even if it's like a shared lot that's in a downtown area, just making sure that the public knows that it's okay to park there. Get out of your car, kiosks, getting information, maps. So this is in Fredericksburg, Texas. We did a map here where they had a hard time organizing all of the businesses on a map, and people on this call are probably pretty aware of this type of map where you list out all the businesses. So what we did is we created a map that doesn't change on the top portion. It's a grid, and we use an address system, and the bottom part in the kiosk is removable and can be changed out when businesses close or they move or they're coming in as new. Pedestrian signs, these are in New Haven, downtown New Haven. So identifying the district that you're in. So if you have multiple districts, you want to let people know. You also want to let them know, instead of saying how many blocks it is, you want to let them know how many minutes it takes to get to the destination. Because a block in different cities can vary. It could be a short block or it can be a long block. So we've always used minutes as our guide to tell people how far away a destination is. And then you can always go down into your street signs, having those themed to your brand and identity. And then bike signs. So these are all of those wayfinding tools that John was talking about in the wheel graphic that we showed previously. We do a lot of parks and trails. So in Whistler, the resort and municipality of Whistler, using pictographs, identifying the park, but then showing the amenities with pictographs, because this is a way, instead of having a list, you can easily have a snapshot of what you can do in that park, but including that brand on there as well, so that you realize that it's an official park of the city. And then trail signs. So we like to consolidate all of that information into one area and one sign. If you've ever gone to a trail, sometimes you've noticed where they'll have different sign types all over the place. So we like to organize that information, do it in the design theme, but also have these trail signs visible from, say, an automobile or a car, like if you're driving by. So you realize that, oh, there's a trail over there. I'll come back later and maybe do that another day. And we get all the way down into trailhead markers, putting wayfinding information on that, interpretive signage, sidewalk compasses, any kind of wayfinding tool that is physical that we can use and make it appropriate for that place. Crosswalks, decorative crosswalks that lead you, public art. And this is in Frederick. They had a parking garage that was sort of hidden away because it's in their historic downtown area. They didn't want this huge structure. So there was a blank wall there. So we suggested maybe doing a trompe-l'oeil mural, which is in character with other murals that are in their downtown area. So using that style to direct to the parking garage. Icons, this is in Asheville, North Carolina, Ripper Arts District. Creating that Instagram moment, so your reach is further than just the place that you're in. And then, like John said, we like to do, we do all our maps, interpretive plans. We'll use QR codes on our kiosks and interpretive panels, but also having a wayfinding app this is a walking tour in Newark, New Jersey. So it counts your steps, and it's a historic walking tour that it's all around the downtown Newark.
So often people come to us, and this is where you want to start to think about what it is. It's not that every town uses all of these things. Certain ones use certain pieces, and some are very concentrated on one type of wayfinding element. And that's where you want to start to think about what is a realistic scope to your project. We have groups that come to us and say, we have a budget of zero. We don't have anything, but we need to know what we need to do. And in that case, you can start it by doing maybe just a wayfinding analysis or assessment and sort of go through that study portion, do schematic designs to get an idea, and you may come out of that and say, okay, there's 20 different things the town can do. The town can decide to do all 20, or they could just decide to do 2, and that can be based on priorities and approvals and funding and that sort of thing. Other times people will come to us and say, well, we have this exact amount of money and we want to do vehicular signs, or we want to do vehicular part, and it's very set. So you can go about it both ways, but the more I think upfront that you understand exactly what you want to do, the better. I mean, sometimes we show this presentation like, oh yeah, we want to do everything. Well, if you do everything, obviously the cost to do that is much higher. If you go through an assessment, you're more likely to go through and come out of it with a phasing plan that says, okay, we can get to everything, but we have sort of an informed and educated approach to developing that strategy. Savannah, do we want to just maybe pause and see if there's any questions, or?
So far, there are no questions, John, but if anyone has a question, I invite you now to either put it in the chat, or that we also have the Q&A open.
And we will come back at the end with the Q&A as well.
Yes.
Okay. So as you start to go into a wayfinding program or establish one, there's 3 sort of components you can start to think about. So the first is the strategy or the administration of it. Who gets included? Where does the funding come from? What's the approval process look like? If a sign gets hit, who gets the call to repair it, right? Then the second part is the wayfinding. Literally, how do people get from point A to point B? What's the best route? Where do they park? Where are there connections that I want to make between 2 destinations that either formally or informally cross-market each other? And then there's the design. How does the design of the system, the aesthetic of it, capture the character and culture of the place? Is it leaning towards that historic aspect? Is it a more creative system? How does it reflect your brand, either from a direct literal identity standpoint, or how does it reflect it just from an experience standpoint? So from the administrative aspect of it, one of the first numbers we always give out is that plan for maintenance. Even before you start, understand that there is a maintenance cost to wayfinding programs. And you can generally use 10 to 15% of your construction cost. So if you spend $350,000 to implement a system, it may be $35,000 or more to maintain it annually. And that includes, adding signs, repairing signs, cleaning signs. It's a general number to utilize. Always involve the DOT and any other approving agencies at the very beginning. Do not get it through documentation and then show it to DOT. You have to bring them along throughout the process to make sure if there's any specific issues that you're addressing those along the way. You also have to have a clear criteria for destination. So once the signs go up, people are going to have their hands up and say, how can I be included? One of the things that we provide is that criteria of what types of destinations are listed on the signs, and if there are thresholds that they have to meet to be included. We do not direct to, typically we do not direct to private businesses, right? You're not directing to Starbucks or any sort of retail places. There is an enhanced version of the destination inclusion where you have tourism attractions that are privately owned, but we all sort of agree that they should be listed on the signs. That's sort of a municipal and DOT conversation that also has to happen. And then you want to identify those funding sources. How is not only the design and planning, but also the implementation, how's that going to be funded? And are there priorities? What are the budgets? Are there certain amounts each year? And what can you fit into that budget so that you create an organized phasing strategy? So we talked about this a little bit earlier. So there's public engagement. There's definitely those stakeholder groups of the destinations, the interested parties, the approving agencies that all need to be included in that process. And then you also have the local community. So we do a lot of public engagement throughout the process, whether it's just an introduction of what the project is through the design phase when we actually have design options and we're gathering information from the groups. And then just real quick on the maintenance. So you want to think about that early on. So who manages the project long term? Is it going to reside in the city? Is it going to reside in the Main Street organization or the Visitors Bureau? Who will be the point of contact when a sign needs repair, right? So a sign gets hit or gets damaged, who's going to get that call? And then at that point, who's going to go out and fix it? Is that a city responsibility, or do you have a contract with the fabricator who built the signs to go out and make that fix? And then where does that funding come from to pay that person to make that fix, right? So there's different components to that ongoing strategy, day-to-day maintenance, physical maintenance, and then the funding of that maintenance. And some general wayfinding considerations. You always want to try and create memorable gateways, right? And that does not necessarily need to be a post and panel sign. It certainly can go beyond signage. You can start to think about landscaping, lighting, public art, and which gateways are your wow gateways and which ones are maybe just a boundary marker. You want to establish connections between between districts and destinations. As Glenn mentioned earlier with parking, you want to direct to it, identify it as public parking, and then inform people what the rules are. And I think we find more and more that promoting parks and trailheads as community assets and outdoor active communities, that is an important piece of community wayfinding. And then also look at your kiosks to cross-market destinations. So it doesn't tell me what I can do just in the downtown, but it can tell me what I can do throughout the community. So I'm cross-marketing it, or I'm there in the springtime and I'm promoting a festival or event that happens in the fall. So think about it as a marketing tool of a year-round events so that you're using the wayfinding to bring people back. When it comes to the vehicular portion, there's definitely a manual for uniform traffic control device requirements. 3 messages per panel. There's approved typefaces and arrow styles. We have to have reflective copy. Copy heights drive the size of the sign, and that's based on the speed of the road. And then we have contrast and other things. The funny thing about this is it says 3 messages per panel, but in New Haven, in Connecticut, DOT allowed us to do 5. It's the only place we ever did it, and it's in Connecticut. So you have a little bit of an enhanced version of it, but generally it's 3. You'll see that towards the end. And just tell your story. That's another thing you can think about. You know, you're drilling down from that big picture of welcoming people, getting to the parking, now they're walking around. Can you tell the story of the place? Can you promote things to do while you're there? So it's just, how many layers do you want to include as you go through this? Glenn's going to walk us through our methodology. Since it's Connecticut, we've included some Connecticut projects here with West Hartford, Mansfield, and in the end, New Haven. But it'll take you through the step-by-step process of the tasks that are associated with each piece.
Yeah, so if you've ever done like an architectural project or a planning project, we follow a similar approach. I mean, phase one is the discovery period where we're trying to gather enough information to put together a wayfinding analysis. So we're looking for what are the goals of the project, you know, looking at budgets, funding, schedules, and then doing actual analysis of wayfinding routes and just looking at every aspect of the project. The second part of that includes 3 schematic design options. So those are the options that you could then start to present. You can put into funding packages. So if you had just this phase one, you could take that and go for grants, right? You can look for funding because you would have the plan and then you would have the design concepts that would go with it. So this is an example in West Hartford of a wayfinding analysis and schematic design. So we look at we do online surveys. You know, we look at, you know, what's the mode of transportation? We ask questions that are relevant to that place, and we'll do that. We'll also take a look at, you know, digital wayfinding. Like John said, we're looking at all aspects of wayfinding and include that in the survey. We'll do a visual survey of what's existing. So this is what they had out there existing, some good, some bad, but definitely not consistent. So you'd want to, you know, look at that and understand what are things that you're gonna keep and maybe things you're gonna replace.
Like the bottom right-hand corner is they have a really nice West Hartford gateway of letters that march across that wall. That's not going anywhere, right? That
Right.
stays. And then it also becomes part of the overall design language to a certain extent.
Right. We're looking at gateways. We're looking at arrival points. West Hartford had like 25 of them. It's just the way it is. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 25.
And that really can help you from a budget standpoint, right? So you look at your number. So that's what you can get out of this early step is, well, how many gateways do we have? Is it 2 or is it 20? How many are wow gateways where I'm going to spend maybe $50,000, $75,000 on it? And how many are just little gateways where it's a post and panel and I'm just trying to mark the boundary? So there's information in this analysis that then feeds into an order of magnitude budget. 2 gateways, 20 gateways.
We'll look at districts. Are there established districts that you can direct to, and what's the circulation to those districts? Like John said, we're limited to the amount of information we can have on a panel, so we want to direct from district to districts from a further distance, or get people to that core downtown area. Parking is always a huge thing. I mean, we look at parking almost as a subcategory of wayfinding. And we're very familiar with how parking works in downtown areas, parking lots, parking garages, parking pedestrian signs, so that we can, you know, establish that parking system with that consistent parking P. As part of the analysis, we'll go through all of the terminologies. We'll see what we're directing to, what can fit on a sign, a typical sign width. You know, do we have to use abbreviations?
Here's an equation I say is 100% right. The more destinations you have equals the more signs you have equals the higher cost of the system. So when you start to say, even just looking at parks, you want to direct to parks that have tournaments and are major visitor attendees, but you're not going to direct to a park that has a swing set. So you have to look at those destinations and be realistic as to, well, what am I including all the high schools? Am I including the post office? Like, what level of inclusion do you have?
So then when we get into the design process, we have design considerations. Are there existing brands? Are there existing color palettes that the city or town already has? What are the neighboring communities doing, right? So you don't want to necessarily copy what they're doing as well. So like Hartford and Bloomfield, they have some wayfinding elements. So you want to see what's, you know, do you have existing signs that you want to use? So, you know, their identity and brand, they had just rolled out this new identity, and they're putting it on their information, on their signs. So we knew that that was a direction that we wanted to go in. So using that existing brand, using, you know, brick as a material, because they used to make brick in West Hartford, having information kiosks, four-sided, where you can have interpretive information, wayfinding maps. The second option is an artful and community option. I think in a lot of our designs, we did it in Asheville. We always involve the art community. We try to incorporate artistic elements into some of our design options. So that first option was more about brand. This is more about maybe having a local artisan make welded panels on the back of the signs. The third option was more of a classic design, time honored, looking at more of a historical approach, and bringing in more of a historic look to the signage system. So, but incorporating LEDs and digital strategy into the parking. So if you have a parking lot that is constantly being filled up, you want to let people know how many lots there are. We also, you know, in Connecticut and a lot of towns, this in West Hartford, the parking lots are behind the businesses, right? So you want to make sure that you identify those portals or those alleyways that get you back to those parking areas. After you do that first phase, then there's phase two, and that's the planning and design. So you've got your funding, you're ready to go. We can start planning where the signs are going to go and what they're going to say. So we're looking at you know, quantities of signs, different sign types. We'll do all of this work in plan. We'll also do it in GIS, and then we'll expand out that menu. This was the design option that West Hartford went with. They went with their branded option, using their brand colors and their logo, and expand it out to all the different sign sizes based on the different conditions that we're programming for. So parking, we'll start to do photo renderings to see what they'll look like in space. We are replacing, they do have an existing wayfinding system out there now. We are replacing that. But then, you know, kiosks, showing what those would look like. Pedestrian signs, sometimes mounted to existing poles to save money on putting another pole in the ground. We'll do that sometimes. And then you get to the final phase, phase three, which is documentation and bidding and construction admin. So we go all the way through the process. Like John said before, we don't build signs, but we are very familiar with how signs are built. And we will always document things that can be buildable. So, but we will go out, the DOT requires us to do drawings in signs within their right of way. So we're looking at site distances and making sure they're placed appropriately in the environment. And then we do all of our design intent documentation. So all of the graphic layouts, all of the you know, color callouts, material callouts, breakaway footers and foundations, and we take it all the way down to, you know, how the brackets are connected and how things are put together.
This was for Mansfield.
Yeah, this is for Mansfield. Right. So Mansfield, you know, directing to their neighborhoods and their districts, historic districts, you know, and these are just some examples of graphic layouts. But the thing about Mansfield is, you know, a lot of people think Stores, Connecticut, you know, Yukon, they don't really know about Mansfield. Like if there ever is a basketball game on TV, they'll always say, you know, we're in Stores, Connecticut, but really they're in Mansfield. So one of the key things is they wanted to promote Mansfield and all of the areas of Mansfield. So we had that on the signage at the bottom, but then also promoted it on the gateway arrival signs. So then foundation details, breakaway. So enough that you can get to bid the project. And then the signs get built and then they get put in the ground. This is in New Haven, system that's been in for a few years now. It is a modular system, or where the panels can be locked into the poles, cam locked in, so that if you need to replace it, you're just replacing the panel. Kiosks, identifying the districts you're in, having maps and information. And then also looking at other opportunities for wayfinding, like wrapping electrical boxes.
Thanks, Glenn. So just to conclude, so what we always like to say is what we do and what your wayfinding should do is really be of its place. So, what works in San Diego does, is something different in Savannah. What we did in Miami is different than what we did in Whistler, and that you're always trying to solve the issue that may be at hand, whether it's a sign or a mural, or vehicular versus pedestrian. It really should always sort of reflect your place. So with that, we'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, John and Glenn. A question that came in so far, we have a few questions for you. One is, do you have any recommendations for rural areas that may not have a compact main street?
Yeah, so we've done projects in rural areas, and one of the things you'll find with that, two things you'll find with that. One is your signs tend to be a little bit larger because you're on rural roads that have a little bit of a higher speed. You're not in a compact downtown where it's only like 15, 20, 25 miles per hour. So you tend to have slightly larger signs. The other thing you need in those is you tend to get a little bit more of a quantity because you have to give confirmation along the way. So you may tell somebody to turn, but they may not get to something for another 2 or 3 miles, and you may feel like you need that confirmation sign along the way. You also tend to get a little bit higher sometimes in quantity count because to get to something, there's multiple turns to get to it since it's such a distance. So there's a little bit more of size and quantity with the rural systems compared to a downtown, where probably the highest complexity in the downtown is if you run into one-way streets, then sometimes your routes get, you have to wrap somebody around a block to get somewhere.
Yeah, from a design standpoint, I think rural areas tend to be less decorative, right? Because the investment of say you're in a downtown, like what we showed in Frederick, where it had a decorative base, you don't necessarily, and depending on this area, you don't necessarily want to invest in that in a rural area. So you can possibly afford to have bigger signs, right? So the post might be a little more simpler, but it could be painted out or it could be made to look decorative, but because it's in such a rural area, you don't want to do that
Yeah, so
necessarily.
you sort of pick and choose, okay, we're going to spend our money in these areas that are highly concentrated and it has those elements. And then as you move farther out, you try to simplify to keep the cost down.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is, how common is it for a local steering committee to include representatives from the local arts community? How is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility incorporated into the strategy and design process?
Yeah, so the arts portion of it, it's not uncommon for at least one person from that arts community to be part of it, of the steering committee, or you can have them just as one of the stakeholder groups. So when you do those initial interviews, they can be part of that interview process. As far as the diversity and inclusion, that all comes out of that stakeholder group. So we definitely have projects where there's been multilingual signage, but you want to be strategic as to where that happens. You can't do it on vehicular signs, but you can do it on kiosks and interpretive elements. We also have found that with multilingual signage, directional signs tend to direct to proper names, which translate okay. But when you get into things that are where you really have to read, interpretive signs or rules or something that has more of a text paragraph, that's the sign types that tend to have the multilingual. And I think we showed a couple times, you want to try and use pictograms as much as possible, especially you're at a place that maybe has a lot of international visitors. Try to use pictograms as much as possible as well.
I think from a design standpoint, I can give an example of Asheville, North Carolina. We knew that we wanted to involve the arts community because they have a arts and crafts culture there. They're very artsy community. So instead of having them design the sign portion, which has to meet a lot of criteria, we pick an element of the sign, like the finial on the top was all in Asheville, were all made by local artists and craftsmen. So we knew that from the start, that we knew they had to be involved, and we knew that we had to find an element where they could be involved. So that was that came out of that analysis portion of the beginning of the project, where we just knew we had to have arts involved.
Thank you. Next question. How does wayfinding work if you are trying to serve a mixture of new and old residents and visitors? Parking, transit, bike, pedestrian destinations, municipal services, parks, etc. Many Connecticut Main Street members are connected to residential areas.
Yeah, so a basic sort of pillar of wayfinding is you always want to solve it for the first time visitor. So people who know where they're going, they're going to have their shortcuts and go the way that they know. So if you can solve it for the first time visitor, that's what the solution that what you're looking for. We've designed sign types specifically because of residential areas, and it's usually parks that are sort of tucked back into, say, a neighborhood. Wayfinding signs are not one size fits all. So you may have a certain scale of sign that's necessary in the commercial area, but you may be directing to a destination that goes through, say, a residential neighborhood. So then you have to come up with a sign type that is reflective of that scale. So it's a much slower speed. We don't have to go to have maybe 4-inch high copy. We are sort of cognizant of, we're putting this sign in front of somebody's house. So let's make sure that we're designing something that is an appropriate scale. So that all comes out of that initial analysis as to how many destinations are sort of in those residential areas. And then can we develop or design a system that has enough of a scale that's appropriate for that environment.
I think too that the wayfinding system is not just for tourists, right? It is for the community that lives there as well. It's a source of community pride, and we are directing to community assets, community centers, recreation centers, parks, city halls, things like that, where those are all part of the program. So it connects to the residents that way as well.
Thank you. Our next question is, can you have a highway sign directing to a neighborhood that has no official designation but a branded one? Example, Littleton Arts District.
If it's on the probably not on the highway. So the highway signs, when you see a green and white highway sign, it has to have it has to meet a certain visitor level of, so if you can show that there's, say, 20,000 visitors a year, that's probably at least the minimum amount. But it would be a green and white sign, and you would have to go through the DOT to do that. And if it's a district, you may have if it's labeled as a district, you may have a better chance of getting approval than just trying to go to a neighborhood.
Thanks, John.
Visitorship is a key thing with highway signs.
Thank you. Our next question is, have you encountered property owners who want something in return for allowing signage or artwork on their building directing visitors to a municipal garage? She's referring to the Fredericksburg example.
Yeah, that's really a negotiation between that building owner and what kind of relationship they would have. I don't know the inner workings of what deals are made, when people want to do something like that necessarily, because we just see an opportunity and propose it. But I know that there are some, there's probably something going on when it comes to that.
I think when you do the like Glenn said, when you do the master plan, like we just go through and we're like, oh, that's an opportunity, that's an opportunity. And that's what that analysis does. And then you bring it to the town and say, these are the opportunities. And then through that discussion, you find, well, yeah, we have a very good relationship with that building owner. That is something that we can do. Maybe this one would be more,
or that difficult. There's no way that guy's going to let you do that.
Yeah. But in the analysis, you just sort of identify, we're just like, it's an open slate and we just sort of look at it.
Thank you. We have an attendee that missed a few of the first slides, and they want to know, are there empirical studies or evidence that shows that wayfinding signage encourage or streamlines tourism and downtown navigation? Just a question if elected officials are skeptical of spending tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars on signs.
Yeah, so we did mention that earlier on. You cannot say, well, if we put up this many signs, your revenue will get increase this. That doesn't happen. Tourism and that visitorship is guided by and affected by many different things in addition to just signage, right? There's advertisements, there's marketing, there's all types of things that feed into it. What we do know is that from an investment standpoint, when you look at the cost of a wayfinding program compared to, say, doing a movie theater or doing an arena or doing a minor league ballpark, the cost of a wayfinding program is far, far less, while still getting return on the awareness that it builds to the different place that you can visit. We have, we use, and after the hurricane out in Asheville, the River Arts District, that was probably one of our best success stories as to when we started that project and what it was built up to, and utilizing signage to really direct people to that particular place.
Yeah, the best way to do it is probably to conduct surveys after the fact, and you come back a few years later and Asheville actually did do this. They have a really good visitors bureau, convention and visitors bureau, and they had some surveys. And I think John's slide said 11% were increase in. But that's, again, like John's saying, that's part of that tourism toolkit, right? It's Asheville. They've been building up, and they've been promoting in other ways as well. So the signage was just a component of that overall plan, a marketing plan that they have.
You have to view it as part of that overall toolbox and not just, oh, we put in 10 signs, we're going to increase our revenue by X.
Thank you. What is your recommendation on navigating the municipality desire for a branded, cohesive signage strategy and state DOT restriction on things like sign color, limited text size, etc.?
Yeah, so the DOT requirements are very specific. There is a section in the manual for community wayfinding programs, and it's 2D55. And it does set, so what we've shown you in, say, the vehicular signage, they all meet those requirements. You just have to make sure that you're hiring a designer that is familiar with that guideline. There is an enhancement marker that goes at the top of the sign that's allowed to have a branded component of it. But the sign panels, you're allowed to use custom colors on the sign panels. You just can't use standard color. You can't make them red, that sort of thing. So you have to be able to design. The MUTCD that the DOT goes by has a framework to design within, and it's just very strict within that. And you have to know those rules to design within it.
Thank you. And this is our last question that has been put into the Q&A. So if you have any more questions from the audience, please put them into the Q&A or the chat at this time. This attendee would like to know, is there a template to start gathering information?
About what type of information?
Maybe to start their own wayfinding program in their town?
Yeah, I think, if you go back to this recording at the beginning, there was a list of elements that we thought you should start with. So there's the steering committee, there's the stakeholder group, there's identifying the list of destinations that you might consider. I think there's a lot of that at the beginning bullet points of this presentation that you could use as a template.
Yeah, we have templates that, when we're hired, that we can give to our clients to start the process, and it's just the standard, like an email that, you can send out to all the stakeholders and invite them or
the destination.
yeah.
the
Exactly.
categories that you would fill in for the destination list, those kind of things exist.
Thank you. And we will send out slides and a recap for our members so they can access that information again. One more question came in. Can you integrate historical markers with wayfinding, or is that not recommended?
Oh, no, you definitely can do that. And you look at, and again, during that analysis, you try to figure out, okay, what are the stories you want to tell? You know, how many are there? There are 5 stories or there are 30 stories. And then you start to look at where on that menu of sign types that are going to be utilized for the system, where can I apply those? Is it a standalone element, or is it integrated into, say, a kiosk element, or is it digital, right? You can start to make those decisions. So yeah, interpretive signage is always, you know, something that's considered as part of it. I'll tell you, with the interpretive signage, probably the biggest hurdle always is content. You know, writing the content, getting the photos, that's the harder part than figuring out where within the wayfinding program it layers in.
Thank you, John. That was the last question that came through the chat. So before I make our closing remarks from Connecticut Main Street Center, do either of you have any final thoughts or closing remarks for our audience?
We just want to thank everybody for attending today. We love talking about this stuff, so we're glad you showed up.
So we're glad someone listened.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so again, John and Glenn, it was great to have you on our webinar this morning on wayfinding. We just thank you again. This was great, and I personally learned a lot. And now we will close out the webinar. We invite you to join the more than 80 communities around the state committed to improving their Main Street by becoming a member of Connecticut Main Street Center. As a member, you receive exclusive help and resources to support your downtown work. Please visit connecticutmainstreetcenter.org to learn more. Registration is now open for our December webinar, Deep in Downtown, an update on Deep's municipal services and grant programs. Join us from 11 a.m. to 12 noon on December 19th. Please register at connecticutmainstreet.org/events. Once again, we thank our sponsors and program partners. When you exit this webinar, you should be prompted to complete an evaluation for this presentation. Please take a moment to share your thoughts, as it helps us shape our programming so it is most valuable to you. That concludes today's webinar. Have a great day. Thank you again to our presenters and the audience. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.